To wrap up today's class, I want to show you guys how to block your washcloth project. Now, blocking is the process of dampening and flattening out your stitches, giving your project a really nice shape. And there are multiple ways to block, and it can depend on what project you're working on. So the method that I'm going to show you works best for flat, square, or rectangular objects, like a scarf or washcloth, or maybe even a beanie hat that you just want to lay flat and have a really nice flat surface on it. Once you get into garments like a sweater or a scarf, there are more complicated methods where you can use pinning to exaggerate a shape of a knit project or keep things stretched out or kind of mold it into a shape. But for this project in particular, the yarn that we're working with is a synthetic fiber. So the fiber that you're using with the project does have an effect on the method that you might want to block with. So what we're going to do is very similar to just sort of a light washing, like as if you were going to put it through the washing machine. Now with the washcloth, you might eventually want to put it in the washing machine. I mean, if you're going to be using this on your face, or you're going to be using it to wash dishes, any number of things, it might get dirty and you might want to put it in the washing machine, which as long as you follow our instructions from the label of the fiber, that's totally fine. You will want to make sure that those ends that we wove in up here on the handle and down at the end, you want to make sure that those are woven in really good and kind of backstitch a couple of times. Get those really woven in there with your tapestry needle if you are going to put this in the washing machine, because that does create quite a lot of friction and tumbling, and you'll more likely have an unraveled end if you do put it in the machine. So basic things we're going to need for blocking are, I just get kind of a bowl of water, and for synthetic fiber, remember we did read on our label that we don't want the water to be too hot. Now the water out of my tap is never going to be, boiling, so the water straight out of the tap is going to be fine for this. And then I do use a little bit of just a basic fabric softener, just to make it smell nice and give it a nice soft texture, particularly if this is a gift. If you're making somebody a couple of washcloths as a present, you might want to just give it a nice soft finish and make it smell good before you pass it along. So I've got my big bowl of water here. Let me add a little bit of fabric softener. Just a little bit. This is a tiny project. You don't need much. Okay. And basically, you just want to soak it. So let's mix up that fabric softener. Now, if you're working with a wool fiber, there is something specific called wool soap, which actually I recommend using for sweaters. If you have a sweater that you need to wash, a wool sweater, I always recommend that you hand wash your wool sweaters. They will last so much longer and just maintain a nice structure and shape. So, and also a lot of times wool fibers or synthetic fibers, sometimes they just like in transit and in storage can get like a little bit dusty, and sometimes that can affect the texture. And oftentimes with wool, when you wash it with that wool soap and you do a nice blocking, soak it in water, it can actually soften up the fiber quite a bit and give you a much nicer texture. So I've got the fabric softener nice and mixed up in there, and I'm just gonna leave this soak for, I don't know, 20-30 minutes, just to let the water really permeate into the yarn and let that fabric softener disseminate into the project. And then once this has soaked, once it's you know, gotten all the fabric softener in there. I do also recommend, if you're knitting a project for somebody in particular, ask them if they have an allergy to any kind of detergent. Some people have skin irritation from fabric softeners and fabric detergents, so you might want to ask them before you pass this off as a gift. Especially if it's like a washcloth and they might use it on their face or something. So, now that our now that our project has soaked in our bath for, it's been about a half hour, we can go ahead and wring it out. So basically just gonna pick it up, wring out the excess water. Since this project is a synthetic fiber, we don't really have to worry about it, but with wool fibers, you want to be careful not to do too much, apply too much friction. The two things that will felt your wool and make it kind of pill and felt are heat and friction. So if you've got hot water in there and you cause a lot of friction, it can cause your project to shrink, which is why if you put a wool sweater in the wash, it will shrink up. Now I've laid out a cloth here. You can put this over an ironing board. You basically just want to place your project somewhere where it can sit for a while and just air dry. And even in the sun is better. It can help it air dry a little bit quicker. And one way, if you've got a yarn, particularly wool yarns can absorb a lot of water and hold on to that water. One way to gently wring it out is to wrap your project up in a towel and just kind of do a little, and just kind of apply a little bit of pressure. Just kind of squeeze out that excess water. Okay, and then we can unroll it. Lay our project out nice and flat. Whatever shape you kind of lay it out in now is the shape that it will want to hold and retain once the water has evaporated out of there. And we're going to go ahead and let this dry until all the water has evaporated. If it's about halfway dry and you want to flip it over so that the other side can dry a little bit quicker, go ahead and do that. It can take up to 24 hours for this to dry all the way. Again, if you place it in the sun, if you place it in an area like in front of a fan or outside if you can, it will dry a little bit quicker. Another way that you can sort of get your stitches if you don't have time to soak it or you don't have a big bowl or something, another thing you can do is use just a little bit of steam and very gently, without pressing too hard or without setting the iron. You just want to, on a low setting with just a tiny bit of steam, and steam out your project a little bit. But this is the method I recommend for this particular project and for this particular yarn. All right, so that is it for this week's class. We covered our long tail cast on, we talked about stitch markers, we talked about blocking. Next week we're going to go into our second stitch, which is the purl stitch, and we are going to get a bit further in our scarf. So I look forward to seeing you guys, and happy knitting!